So arr, you know. I'm using this as an intro slide just to make sure there's nobody here that's expecting me to talk about Robert Louis Stevenson and Treasure Island, that kind of stuff. So I'm not talking about gold doubloons in terms of treasure. I'm talking about things in the natural world, like this, for example. So the snowy egret showing off his plumes, his nuptial plumes or whatever. So onward. The format, so to speak, that I'm using to talk about these islands has to do with an amazing program that's been going on for decades now, called the Important Bird Area Program. It's an international program run by BirdLife International out of Cambridge. They're an international organization, very successful in this regard. I'll tell you a little bit about it. The little teepees there are the islands that I will be talking about, and as a whole, they make up the Essex County Rocky Islands Important Bird Area. And I'll tell you a little bit about what that's all about. So, IBAs, Important Bird Areas, are, as you can read, sites that provide essential habitat for one or more bird species. This is all quite simple. It includes sites for breeding, wintering, and or migratory birds, in other words, everything. A few acres or 1,000 acres, usually discrete sites standing out from the landscape. So they can be small, they can be huge, or whatever, and they can be public or private, and protected or unprotected. So this is a way, and the way this occurs is that in any given region, the bird experts are gathered. There may be 10 of them, there may be 15, whatever number, and they focus on their area that they know extremely intimately, and decide, okay, which are the most important bird areas in their home area. And they vote and narrow it down and whatever. I was part of that process here in Massachusetts. Massachusetts Audubon, where I used to work, was the designated IBA entity for Massachusetts. So we gathered together bird experts, and there were a lot of them in Massachusetts. And some that think they're experts, but not so much. But no, we got the real folks and did it, and we came up with there are about 77 important bird areas in Massachusetts as a whole. And one of them, which I take credit for proposing, is this one that we're going to be talking about. And here's another map showing this. There are between 40 and 50 islands between Egg Rock and Hant and the New Hampshire border. And my proposal was, and many of them are of interest or value to bird life in one way or another, which you will find out about shortly. And so I proposed, look, let's call all of these rocky islands one IBA, Important Bird Area, and people like that idea. And so that's the case. The brilliant thing about these IBAs is they carry no legal value to them. In other words, they're not protected by any laws or whatever. They're simply identified as IBAs. And the brilliant thing is that and the important thing is to make sure people know that this property or these properties are an important bird area. And once that happens, and once the community knows that there's an important bird area, even that it's completely unprotected otherwise, then it becomes sacred. And if somebody wants to develop it, they go, oh, you can't do that. It's an important bird area. And that works amazingly well. 75%, there are now thousands of these globally, okay? And something like 75% of areas that have been identified as IBAs that were unprotected gain legal protection. So it's a very amazingly effective program. And I've done many trips of the kind we're going to do. We're doing an abbreviated version on the Ardell tomorrow. So this is just this is what it kind of looks like from the top. If you've ever flown over the area, you'll recognize this is Marblehead Neck and Marblehead Harbor, Tinker's Island, and several of the other islands. And these islands vary in many ways, which I will demonstrate. Some of them are rocks that are almost completely covered, or some of them are completely covered during high tide. This is dry ledge, I think it's called. Anyway, there are a bunch of islands that are like this. You can see the dark line is where the water eventually sort of comes up. These rocky islands, my Irish relatives called skerries. This is the Misery Islands. Great Misery, the larger island, is about 83 acres, and Little Misery is about 4 acres, et cetera, owned by the trustees of reservations. I'm doing actually a trip with Essex heritage folks. I do a couple of boat trips with them every year, and we actually go out to the island and do a walk around. One of the interesting, it's now a wild island essentially, but the history of it, going back to the 19-teens or whatever, it was very much developed as a sort of a luxury island. There was a casino there, and cottages, and a 9-hole golf course, and all of that, all of which all burned down in 1929 or 23, I think it was. And now it's, again, a wild island. The parts, however, that are left of the so-called casino, it wasn't a gambling casino, that was just the name of the club, kind of, are on a hike. So you go through the woods, and it's good birding, and then you can climb up in this area and you have a wonderful view of the coastline and whatever. And there's a nice loop trail. The trustees have done a really nice job in terms of trails and stuff. The other historical thing, because all of these islands have some level of history, is that it's called Great Misery because in the 1600s, I think 1622 or something like that, a boat builder got marooned there in a terrible 3-day winter storm, and it's his misery that is commemorated in the name, etc. This is House Island. It's just 10 acres, and what distinguishes it, again, what's fascinating for me at least, is how all of these islands are different in so many different ways. The one that distinguishes this is right off Manchester, by the way, right adjacent to Manchester Harbor, is that it has the most, all of these islands were forested initially. This one has the most robust forest. It has black oaks and hickories that you can't get your arms around. Huge, and that's far more robust forest cover than in any of the other islands. And I've been on all of the forested islands. So this is Baker's Island. Most of the island, about 45 acres, is privately owned and quite heavily settled. This doesn't even give a strongest impression, but all around the backside of the islands, all densely housed, whatever. And there's all kinds of stories about who colonized it and all of that kind of stuff. But 10 acres is owned by the Essex Heritage Foundation. And so they run regular boat trips out there that, most days, certainly during the summer. And, it's just a pleasant place. You go spend an hour or two just sort of hanging out and see what's going on, and go back to Salem. The trips are out of Salem. And I do trips for them as well in various parts of the area. This is Thatcher's Island, which you'll recognize. 52 acres, I believe, and 22 of it, this end of it, is a national wildlife refuge. People don't often know that, but that is the case. And that's as it should be, as there are some very interesting birds there. This is just another view of Thatcher's. My point being that it's a place where they invite people. You have to sign up early though, and they'll take you out in their boat, and you can tour around the island. You can climb the South Tower, etc. And it's pleasant, and there's usually some interesting birds depending on the time of year. So some of the inhabitants of these islands. This one you will probably recognize. This is a herring gull, of course, an adult herring gull. What you may not know is that there were no herring gulls here until 1912, something like that. And that wasn't even here. There was one nest on Martha's Vineyard, and that was it. One pair of herring gulls nesting. And the state ornithologist at the time, Edward Howe Forbes, said, well, it'll never last. It'll never take. These birds nested much farther north. Well, starting in like the 30s, they gradually increased, spread. Starting in the 1930s and through the 60s, population explosion of herring gulls. And you're probably familiar with that. Although right now, actually, starting in 70s, whatever, they started declining, which you probably haven't noticed, but it is the case. So they're even kind of on a watch list by the Heritage Program. And this is their buddy. This is the great black-backed gull. They took a little longer to get here. The first nest was 1921, I think, in Salem Harbor. And the bird egg collectors probably went out there and took the eggs, that's the kind of thing bird collectors do. Fortunately, they're against the law now. So anyway, they've also done similarly well. And so they're quite handsome. So what was this all about? Well, this is partly what it was all about. Why did these birds become so abundant? One reason was that in those days, fishermen were still allowed to, when they cleaned their fish, to just dump the gurry, dump the fish waste, etc. So this provides huge amount of nutriments for the gulls nesting, bringing food back for their young, makes more young, etc., etc. The other factor, some of you will remember this kind of thing. This is a dump in Linfield that you used to see going on the train to Boston, and this kind of open dumping was very common in those days. And this was, as you can see, this was another huge source of food for gulls, and so the population increased greatly. And one of the downsides of this increase is that these gulls all nested pretty much on islands or other remote sites, so remote beaches and things like that, but mostly islands. And that's where these birds, common terns, nested. Well, the gulls were permanent residents. They were here year-round. The terns are migrants that leave right about now, actually, in September, early October, and go to the tropics. But the gulls are here year-round. So when the terns come back in May, late April, early May, the gulls have already set out their nesting areas and no room for the terns. And so the terns have gone from, in Massachusetts, hundreds of thousands of pairs on Cape Cod alone, on islands and even the mainland areas or whatever. And this seems like this of terns, and there are several rarer species. There would be roseate and Arctic terns in the same batch. They're now down to, and I'm not even up to this latest year on this. This is Tinker's Island off Massachusetts. And the last time we surveyed the area, there was one pair of common terns at one end and one pair of common terns at the other end. And that's it for the region. So it's been a serious decline. Interesting thing is that the residents, I've been out there, talked to the residents, or whatever, they don't like the terns very much because the terns dive bomb them and stuff like that. So they don't actively try to do anything. But the gulls, the terns nest right, cheek by jowl, if that's the right anatomy with the terns. And so, anyway, it's not a good situation for the terns. This is Marblehead Rock, and it always reminds me of the anecdote that says, and this may be apocryphal, but I am told that the reason that Marblehead is called Marblehead is because when some of the first explorers came and they saw rocks like this or whatever that were all white and whatever, they assumed it was marble, whereas in fact we know what it was, right? It was guano. and this is one of the key guano makers. This is a double-crested cormorant, and they nest on many of the now bare rocks. They weren't bare when the cormorants got there, but they are pretty much now. And they'll nest among the gulls. So this is a nice close-up of a double-crested cormorant. We have two cormorants here, a winter cormorant and a summer cormorant. This is the summer cormorant that breeds here. And then they kind of trade places around October, early November, and the great cormorant, which nests in trees, comes down from the maritime provinces and replaces this guy. They're, as the name implies, they're a bit bigger. They have a white face patch and whatever, but most people are like, oh yeah, cormorants are cormorants kind of thing. So you look at this and you think, well, why is it called double-crested cormorant? And the answer is, not exactly crests, but a nice puffy headdress in any case. A few more birds that are, common in the area. This is common eider, and yes, eider as in eider down. This is where the original eider down comes from and still comes from Iceland. They have huge areas of tundra where these guys breed, and what they do is they wait till the females have filled their nest with their down, and then the Icelanders go out and take it. And then they fill the nests with down again, and again the Icelanders go and take it, and make, of course, down stuff. Now, to what extent they're still doing that, I'm not sure, and I have a lot of Icelandic friends. So, anyway, the good news is, on the third go-round, they leave it. so the down is left so they can lay their eggs and rear their young and all of that kind of thing. These birds, when I was a kid, back in Civil War days, were quite scarce in this area. A lot of it, and throughout the coastal New England, a lot of it due to waterfowl shooting. Okay, and so there wasn't much eider eating, but a lot of shooting. But they've come back big time, and they're now nesting on many of the larger islands, including multiple pairs. And if you come with me on the Ardell tomorrow, we'll see some. And then Kettle Island here, I'll draw your attention to, off the coast of Manchester. One of the most interesting islands for birds, at least. This is just an aerial view. All that pink area, this is a winter view, all that pink area is kind of, I wouldn't quite call it scrub, but it's low trees. And that is ideal nesting habitat for egrets, okay, and other wading birds. This is a great egret, snowy egret, which we saw on the first slide. And the history of these birds and the reason that they became very, very scarce, especially back in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, was that there was the fashion to use their plumes on ladies' hats. And there was a huge industry, we're talking what today would be billion-dollar industry, in getting these plumes to the habitat, to the hatters, so to speak. And they would go into big colonies in Florida and elsewhere in the South and just kill the birds, the adult birds, with the plumes, leaving the young to die, to starve or whatever, and often leaving their carcasses, just taking the plumes, etc. And not surprisingly, the populations of these guys just crash. But interestingly, ladies like the one in the picture, Boston Brahmin ladies, got together, learned about this, and said, ladies, we got to stop this. And so they had developed a huge program that insisted that their friends not wear plumes in their hat. And if there was some lady of prominence, they would, bring her in and give her the word, kind of, that this was not to be done. And it was very effective. And it eventually resulted in something called the Lacey Act, which was an act that forbid interstate trade in wildlife products. And I just read something recently where that was invoked, so it's still an active thing. Anyway, that stopped that trade. Took a long time for these egrets to recover. And then we had climate change, so that these basically southern birds started to move northward. We've only had these birds. I remember when I was 16 maybe or something, seeing a snowy egret on Plum Island, it was like, whoa, it was a hugely rare bird. And now, if you go to the marshes, Essex, Plum Island, anywhere, you see these birds and other species, not all of which, many of which nest on a couple of islands, Kettle being one of the main ones. Whoops. Okay, this is just a shot of what the rookery looks like. These guys nest in trees, build stick nests in scrubby tree areas. A nest with cute fuzzies. This is little blue heron. It's another of the species that nests on Kettle and some of the other islands. Very beautiful heron, egret-like bird. This is a black-crowned night heron, and it does indeed feed. He's mainly in dusk and dawn, kind of low light, not in the middle of the night so much, but it's well named. And there are a few of those, and you can see it's typical stick nest. And then this is a glossy ibis, wonderful bird. And indeed it is, I don't know if you can tell, but it does have this wonderful iridescent blue-green plumage, etc. So that's another species from the islands. This is Children's Island, where interestingly, these birds move around to different islands depending on, I don't know, something about whether the change in vegetation is less ideal for them, or there's less of that vegetation, and so they'll move to another island. Not all of them, but some of them. And recently, as I've been doing surveys at the west end of Children's, otherwise known as Cat Island, I noticed there's like a new colony of all of these egrets and different herons and glossy ibis. It's just an aerial view of Children's. The other cool thing that we've been starting to see in fairly recent years is the incursion, and Children's has a number of pairs of this wonderful bird. This is American oyster catcher. Again, this is a southern, well, going back to history, this is a bird that used to occur from the maritime provinces right down to Florida. And then there was a whole period when the commercial bird shooters focused on shorebirds and shot out virtually all of our shorebird species. Godwits, sandpipers, everything. And there's no point in denying that these birds are good to eat, but they just decimated the population. After the passenger pigeons had essentially been killed off, they went to the shorebirds, and they were called prairie, the Eskimo curlew, which of course is now extinct, was called the prairie pigeon because it was prime, it occurred in huge numbers and it was prime stuff. Anyway, these guys have, again, gradually come back, starting in the south and moved in, and we now have pairs of these guys nesting on most of the larger islands in the IBA group. Oops. There are, of course, land birds on these islands, the forested ones, many. This is yellow warbler, be a resident species. Catbird, another common sort of resident in all of them. And then many migrants. If you go to a place like Thatcher's in like mid-September or May or something like that, you see many species of warblers, and sometimes in large numbers, depending on weather and whatever. This is a black Burnian warbler, one of the handsomer wood warblers. And then we don't want to neglect the winter, right? These islands are fantastic in terms of the shellfish beds and things around the shallows, around the islands, and that attracts a different group of birds. This is a drake surf scoter, very common. This is arguably our most magnificent winter duck, harlequin duck. Purple sandpipers, again, there's a winter bird that hangs out around on the rocks. Snowy owls, like the islands, there are, rodents and other things available for their feeding. And there are also rare plants. This is an interesting tree species that has been much disputed about its taxonomy. Some botanists have called it a full species, others just a variety, etc. But its habitat is on islands for whatever reason. I think I have a close-up of the leaves. And this is, I always forget the name, but I wrote it down. Yes, this is called, it's a basswood. And if you know basswood, you recognize it as a basswood. But this has been labeled, whether it's a full species, subspecies, whatever, as coastal basswood, just so we don't ignore the plants. Predators, of course, also occur in these islands. Great horned owls and peregrine falcons find good hunting grounds on these islands, given all the birds that occur there, and so are quite common. And with this kind of result, but they don't do enough damage to be a real problem. And these guys are hell on eider nests, so they're very common on most of the islands. Finally, it's us that is causing problems in a lot of places. This is Salt Island, right off Good Harbor Beach. It's connected by a tombolo. There's the tombolo. You can see Briar Neck in the background. And at some point, a commercial real estate company bought this island, and their idea was that they were going to, they had a family member who was very sensitive to poison ivy. Well, there's poison ivy on all these islands, big time. So their idea was, oh, I know, we'll get some goats, and we'll put the goats on the island, and the goats will selectively eat the poison ivy. Well, I don't know what you know about goats, but goats eat everything. And so if that had been allowed to happen, the island would have just been So we get, I say we, I'm a member of the Open Space and Recreation Commission. We got together with the Conservation Commission or whatever. Oh, you can see these are the posts that they were going to put a fence around the entire island to fence the goats in. Okay, I'm glad to report that that's as far as they got. And the Conservation Commission, this whole idea broke a bunch of maritime laws and things like that. And so they were made to cease and desist. The posts are no longer there. We're waiting to see what the next step might be, but the goats are certainly out. I'm going to end with a cultural bit of these islands. I'm sure you'll recognize Winslow Homer, or maybe not. But this is 10 Pound Island, and he spent the summer of 1880 on 10 Pound Island. He had previously spent several summers in Gloucester painting. But on 10 Pound Island, he changed his style. He used to be, he did Civil War illustrations, very tight, pen and ink kind of things. But here he changed to the style that we're kind of more familiar with, loose watercolors, such as this. And this would have been painted on 10 Pound Island, looking across to the Manchester shore, etc. He also painted wildlife. So this painting of common golden eyes is called Left and Right, referring to the shotgun barrel that was used. And then finally, this gentleman, T.S. Eliot. Some of us had views yesterday in the great distance of the Dry Salvages. One of his poems is called Dry Salvages. It's one of the 4 quartets. And he had a footnote in the poetry book saying salvages rhymes with assuages. Okay? Now the original of the name is the Trois Sauvages, the 3 savages, which was Champlain's name for it because of the rocks, the 3 rocks that they had to watch out for in their wooden boats and kind of stuff. Interestingly, though, his cousin, Samuel Morris Harrison, Samuel Eliot Morrison, thank you. Samuel Eliot Morrison, who was T.S. Eliot's cousin, said, wrong, it's salvages. And he was taking that from local tradition, fishermen or whatever. So much for hoity-toity assuages. Anyway, that's it. Just the last idle shot. Advertising for Mass. I hope I kept the time.